Morning, everyone. I'm Lucy Lang, New York State Inspector General. With me is Deputy Inspector General Jessica Silver. On average, nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner in the United States. Here in New York, statistics show that a little over 30% of our neighbors will experience violence, sexual violence, or stalking from an intimate partner during their lifetimes. This is a crisis that was only exacerbated by the pandemic, when the volume of calls to the New York State Domestic and Sexual Violence Hotline increased nearly 45%. In recognition of these victims, I invite you to join me in a moment of silent acknowledgement. The investigation that brings us here today to the New York State Crime Victims Memorial during National Crime Victims' Rights Week was prompted by one specific tragedy. And I'll be sharing our investigative findings about failures by the New York State Office of Information Technology Services, or ITS, and the New York State Office of General Services, or OGS, to comply with their own domestic violence and the workplace policies. I will also announce our upcoming efforts at the Inspector General's office to enhance statewide agency compliance with initiatives designed to combat domestic violence. I am hopeful that together we can bring this issue into the light where it belongs. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that this content is difficult to hear, and I encourage those of you who are watching and listening to prioritize your safety and well-being if you need to step away. If you or someone you know is suffering from domestic violence, please call the New York State Domestic and Sexual Violence Hotline at 1-800-942-6906 or use the resources or live chat available at opdv.ny.gov. One need not look to statistics to recognize the way in which domestic violence impacts the lives and endangers the safety of thousands of New Yorkers every day. Virtually all of us know someone affected by it, whether we know it or not. And the collateral effects extend well beyond the home into all areas of society, including the workplace, where it compromises the safety of both victims and coworkers. New York State, one of our state's largest employers, has long been a leader in acknowledging this fact, as well as acknowledging the role employers can play in combating domestic violence. The New York State Office for the Prevention of Domestic Violence, or OPDV, was created in 1992 with a mission to improve New York State's response to and prevention of domestic violence, with the goal of enhancing the safety of all New Yorkers in their intimate and family relationships. OPDV, the only organization of its kind in the country, offers agencies a model domestic violence and the workplace policy, which identifies and prescribes agency practices including training, awareness, and reporting components to ensure that agencies will be equipped to properly respond to such situations. Since 2008, pursuant to executive order, state agencies have been required to use OPDV's model to formulate and adopt policies of their own. OGS and ITS have each formulated and implemented such domestic violence policies, but as our investigation revealed, a written policy is only as good as how effectively it is implemented. And here, when an ITS employee informed her agency that she was a victim of domestic violence, when she reached out for help, it fell on deaf ears. Tragically, almost a year later, her husband, who himself had been employed by OGS until his resignation a few weeks prior, killed her in their home before taking his own life. While the facts of this ultimate tragedy are beyond the scope of our investigation, which assessed only the agency's compliance with their internal policies, it provides critical context for the complexities and the dangers of domestic violence. We will never know if any kind of intervention could have prevented this tragedy. But this is an opportunity to reflect on and improve the way we respond to domestic violence in the future. All of us. Although I will not be sharing the victim's name at the request of and out of respect for her family, I will tell you that she was a longtime state employee who was beloved by her family, friends, and coworkers at the agency where she worked for over 30 years. I'm hopeful that by identifying and evaluating where her agency fell short, and by making recommendations to increase awareness of domestic violence issues in the workplace at ITS and OGS, we may aid others in receiving support in a time of need. In the spirit of the community it will take to stem this dangerous tide, I'd like to share some words of gratitude. Thank you to ITS and OGS for their cooperation in this investigation, and for the steps they have already taken to address the deficiencies identified, many of which are listed in their written response, which is included in this report. I'd like to thank the New York State Coalition Against Domestic Violence, particularly Executive Director Connie Neal, who is here today, for her insight and expert advice in crafting our recommendations for how state agencies should support their employees on issues of domestic violence. I would like to thank the Office for the Prevention of Domestic Violence for their assistance as well. I deeply thank the family of the victim in this case for sharing their devastating story with me, with us, and for their ongoing work to educate others about domestic violence. I hope that their courage and perseverance is a model to other New Yorkers, and that this report speaks to the facts that the Office of the Inspector General is here to receive your complaints into fraud, corruption, misconduct, or policy or procedural deficiencies in state government, no matter the source or subject matter. I can assure you that complaints will be treated with the dignity they deserve by the committed members of my office. And to that end, I extend gratitude to my whole office, including those gathered here today, but especially to the outstanding team who worked tirelessly on this investigation. Deputy Inspector General for the Downstate Region, Jessica Silver, who oversaw the investigation, along with Investigative Counsel John Tuppen. Chief of Investigations for the Upstate Region, Sherry Amaral. Deputy Chief of Investigations for the Upstate Region, Gary Waters. Senior Investigator, Eileen Gates. Director of Digital Forensics, Matt Patel. Director of Investigative Writing, Jonathan Masters, who was critical in drafting the report. And thank you to Chief of Staff, Ryan Hayward, for absolutely everything. These committed public servants, when presented with these policy and procedural failings, did not just seek to confirm the facts, but they did what our office must do best, what is our mandate: a comprehensive investigation to uncover what happened, how it happened, and what ITS, OGS, and truly all state agencies should do to ensure that we all do better for our fellow New York State workforce colleagues. And they did it by conducting exhaustive interviews, reviewing thousands of documents, including police reports, agency policies, emails, and forensically extracted digital data. I am deeply proud of their efforts and the fact that, as you will learn from the written response, the agencies in question have already taken significant steps towards addressing all of the identified issues. I'd now like to introduce Deputy Inspector General Jessica Silver to outline the findings of our investigation. Deputy IG.
Thank you, Inspector General Lang. On August 22nd, 2019, a then OGS employee, who I will refer to as the husband, filed a complaint with his agency alleging that his wife, then an ITS employee, was misusing her state-issued cell phone. At the time, the husband was the subject of his own internal disciplinary action, and his termination was being sought by his agency. On September 6, 2019, the husband repeated the allegations in a second complaint. On September 12, 2019, when ITS commenced its investigation of the wife, she disclosed to certain senior ITS employees that she was the victim of domestic violence by her husband and was using her state-issued cell phone to document his behavior and abuse because he was monitoring her personal cell phone. She characterized the abuse as physical, verbal, and mental, and specifically noted that she needed material on the phone, voice recordings, voicemail messages, and pictures to support her request for an order of protection. Despite ITS's near immediate awareness that the wife had reported that she was a victim of domestic violence and requests to obtain the recordings, messages, and images from her phone, senior employees in the labor relations and legal departments denied her request without first the opportunity to review the materials. Rather, they reiterated a need for greater details about the materials being sought and suggested that the employee have an attorney subpoena them. Instead, rather than consult with the employee to develop and implement an individualized workplace safety plan and take steps to ensure the staff knew how to provide a safe environment for her, the agency proceeded with a disciplinary action against her, resulting in a counseling memo. Ultimately, our investigation found that ITS's failure to comply with its domestic violence policy was due to a lack of agency awareness regarding the policy, as well as a gap in staff's understanding of the sensitivities inherent in domestic violence situations. Glaringly, the investigation revealed that ITS senior employees had little, if any, knowledge about their domestic violence policies, of resources available to assist victims, or even the identity of their OPDV liaison, despite working with the liaison on a regular basis. Additionally, when the liaison went on an extended leave in February of 2020, ITS was effectively without an OPDV liaison for in excess of 6 months. Inspector General Lang will now discuss the recommendations included in the report, which will make our state workers better prepared, responsive, and safer for domestic violence victims and all state employees.
Thank you, Deputy Inspector General. Quote, "Okay, whatever you have to do. I understand your situation, but can anyone make labor relations think logically? It is so sad that they beat the horn about agencies protecting domestic violence victims, but when it actually comes to practice, they're not even willing to consider anything." Those were the words of the victim in an August 3rd, 2020 email to her supervisor, when she was informed that ITS would not be pursuing formal discipline against her, but would instead counsel her for the misuse of her cell phone, the contents of which she never received. Thus, in seeking to enforce its acceptable use of information technology resources policy, ITS prioritized a policy related to state-issued technological devices over those of its domestic violence policy and the needs of its employee. Everyone has the right to work in a safe and secure workplace. While the state has created policies to ensure an effective response from agencies, those policies proved ineffective here because the agency at issue did not effectively implement them. As a result, the offices of the Inspector General have the following policy recommendations. Require all staff to read the domestic violence policy and annually verify that they understand it. Assign one or more OPDV liaisons and make sure staff knows who they are. Make sure the liaisons are trained in domestic violence policy and resources, mindful of the risks and impacts of vicarious trauma to both the OPDV liaison and to other staff. Educate all staff about the impacts of trauma and take a trauma-informed approach to communicating with anyone who identifies as a survivor. Check that policies are current as to both supporting a staff person who may be a victim of domestic violence, as well as procedures to address staff who may be perpetrators. Make the Office of Employee Relations and OPDV online trainings available for all employees about domestic violence and relevant intersecting topics like stalking, mental health, and alcohol and substance misuse. Require such training for every new hire during the onboarding process. Now, given that a policy is only good as the way it is implemented, starting today, my office will be conducting a comprehensive audit of all state executive branch agencies to ensure compliance with state domestic violence and the workplace mandates. We will provide these findings to OPDV, who have committed to working with the agencies to ensure proper training and resources are made available. Standing here today at the State Crime Victims Memorial, we remember those who've been lost and those who've survived their encounters with domestic violence, who bear its scars. Dedicated to victims of crime and their families, this memorial is a symbol of the tragedy and the heartbreak that can be caused by such violence. We pay our respects to the families and friends of those who were taken from us too soon. And we renew our pledge to seek justice for survivors. In an obituary written by her son, the victim is remembered as an accomplished, loving, and passionate person. An immigrant, a mother, loved by all for her personality, her faith, and her optimism, and who believed in the value of service and saw the good in everyone. Her family described her as a bright ray of sunshine who always had an uplifting presence. She had a radiant personality and loved being with family and friends. And as her son noted to me, she gave 30 years of her life to New York State. And so I'm here to say to this family, it's still in mourning, New York State grieves alongside you and commits to making the changes necessary to offer support to others who are suffering. New York State employees should be able to count on their employers to take a trauma-informed approach to understanding their circumstances and connecting them with experts and resources to help end the terrifying cycle of domestic violence. To all victims of domestic violence, you do not have to suffer in silence. The Office of the New York State Inspector General stands with you. I invite questions. Do you want to speak to that, or should I?
No, because we collect anonymous data, because it's sensitive data.
Do you mean with respect to this particular case? With respect to this particular case, the report enumerates the back and forth exchanges that were had between the victim in this case and various members of staff. With respect to overall state agencies, it's anonymized, but there are anonymous statistics available through opdv.ny.gov.
Can you identify the area of New York State where this happened? Was it a capital region case?
It was a capital region case. With that, I'm going to ask Deputy Inspector General Silver to share a few thoughts.
Certainly at first, I think everybody who was close to the victim and were shocked. And I think that there was a reflection, an immediate sort of attempt at trying to sort of gather the facts and details and find out what had happened and review if there were any steps that could have been made differently.
I'm sorry, we were talking about after the death, right?
Yes.
So, but with respect to the initial complaint that she made, it was not elevated beyond the levels enumerated in the report. No.
Because of this case, does New York State have any liability?
It's not within the purview of the state inspector general to speak to civil liability issues.
So aside from additional learning programs or education programs, how do you plan to alleviate this kind of issue from happening?
This is an utter tragedy, and we are calling on all New Yorkers, including the press, to help us elevate these issues that have too long been obscured from public view, and to encourage state agencies to speak openly and to seek support in areas that they don't know. Because so much of what happened here is that warning signs were disregarded. And that is a failure of education, a failure of training, and is the reason that domestic violence has for generations existed outside of the public sphere. And we have to work together to solve that.
You mentioned a review of the executive branch agencies starting today. How long does something like that take, and what's kind of the work that entails?
Well, I wish that I had my chief of audit here so that I could put him on the spot and ask him how long it will take, but I expect that it will take us several months to gather data from all of the state agencies under our jurisdiction, to process it, to follow up where necessary, and then to aggregate it into a form that we can share with OPDV.
Are you able to enumerate how many active investigations there might be at this point?
I'm not. The family members of the victim are not with us in person today, but I know that they are with us in spirit.
We take measures to make it easier for people to report domestic violence. I know there's measures already, but just make it that someone can just go straight to one place, make a complaint, and then the state can jump on it immediately.
All of these policies are designed to make sure that no matter who someone discloses their abuse to, that person has the knowledge to refer the victim to appropriate resources. Thank you all so very much. Just to conclude, for more information, please see our report at ig.ny.gov. Please follow this and our other work on Twitter and Instagram at New York State IG. To New Yorkers who are suffering from abuse in the home, you do not have to suffer alone. Please seek help from the New York State Domestic Violence and Sexual Violence Hotline at 1-800-942-6906, or use the resources or live chat available anytime at opdv.ny.gov. And to all state employees, citizens, or others who identify fraud, corruption, or abuse in state government, the offices of the Inspector General are here to serve you, our fellow New Yorkers. Stay safe and healthy, all. Thank you.